Picture the exact moment it must have happened for the first time. Not a coronation, not a battle, nothing that dramatic. Just an ordinary person, standing in front of a stranger, choosing to lower their eyes instead of meeting them. That single, quiet decision repeated by enough people enough times is the real origin of kings, not armies. Not gold. Obedience offered voluntarily to someone who had never personally proven anything to the person kneeling in front of them. For almost the entire span of human existence, that moment simply did not happen, because the human mind was not built to allow it. Small communities of hunters and gatherers were, in a very real sense, hostile environments for anyone with big ambitions. If a member of the group started acting like his opinions mattered more than everyone else's, the group had tools ready. Mockery worked shockingly well. So did quiet exclusion, refused cooperation, or simply gathering your belongings and walking somewhere else. A reputation for greatness earned in one hunt could evaporate the moment a person tried to convert that reputation into command. Being impressive was allowed. Being obeyed was not. This wasn't some idealized fairness instinct. Humans have never had trouble creating hierarchies, through age, skill, family ties, generosity, charisma, or brute intimidation. What they resisted was permanence. A hierarchy that reset itself, that had to be earned again and again, is fundamentally different from one that simply exists whether you like it or not. And the difference between those two worlds came down to a psychological trick nobody consciously invented, but that certain conditions made almost inevitable, convincing people that a stranger's authority was not really about that stranger at all. The shift began quietly, with something as unglamorous as a full storage pit. Once communities stopped moving and started returning, season after season, to the same fields, the same fishing grounds, the same patches of stored grain, something changed in how people related to risk. Leaving an unfair arrangement used to be simple. Pack up, walk away, start again somewhere else. But once your grain was buried in a specific pit, your animals grazed on a specific pasture, and your dead relatives were buried in a specific patch of earth, walking away stopped being free. It carried a cost, and the moment leaving becomes expensive. Staying and tolerating becomes psychologically easier to justify, even to yourself. Unequal harvests did the rest of the psychological work. Two households, similar in every visible way, could end up in very different positions after a run of ordinary luck. One family's soil holding moisture a little longer. One family losing labor to illness during a critical week. The successful household could then lend grain, arrange favorable marriages, or offer protection in exchange for loyalty. None of this required force. It required patience and the quiet, repeated experience of depending on someone else's surplus. Dependence is where obedience starts to feel less like submission and more like common sense. As settlements swelled from a few dozen familiar faces into communities of strangers, an even deeper psychological pressure appeared. You cannot resolve every dispute with mockery and gossip when half the people involved are people you've never spoken to. Somebody has to decide who irrigates first, who owes what, who gets punished for stealing grain from someone they've never met. And when a person starts making those decisions competently and repeatedly, something shifts in how a crowd perceives them. Competence, given enough time, gets quietly mistaken for entitlement. Violence accelerated this shift dramatically, because fear reorganizes trust faster than almost anything else. When outside groups threatened stored wealth, or fertile land, or trade routes people depended on for survival, communities became far more willing to hand real, coordinated power to whoever could organize a defense. A commander who won consistently kept the loyalty he earned during the emergency, long after the emergency ended, because nobody wants to be the person who challenges the man currently keeping them alive. Temporary authority, born from fear, has a way of forgetting to expire. But none of this fully explains the strangest part of the psychological transformation, the part where people stopped merely obeying and started believing they were supposed to. Fear can make you comply. It cannot make you kneel voluntarily once the threat has passed. For that, something else had to be manufactured entirely, a story convincing enough that people stopped asking uncomfortable questions about why one family, and not another, deserved everything. Religion offered exactly that story, and it is difficult to overstate how effective it was. A leader claiming a special relationship with unseen, all-knowing forces gained something raw power alone could never buy: the sense of being watched and judged even when nobody else was around. A soldier standing guard can only enforce obedience while he's physically present. A god, by definition, never leaves. Rulers who successfully wrapped themselves in that idea gained a kind of psychological leverage that no army could replicate, an internalized obedience that people carried with them even when they were completely alone. Then came the piece that made the entire structure self-sustaining. Convincing people that authority belonged not to the person, but to something the person merely represented: a bloodline, an office, a divine appointment. This single idea solved kingship's greatest weakness: mortality. An impressive individual eventually dies, and personal loyalty typically dies with him. But if people could be convinced that power belonged to a family or a sacred position rather than to one irreplaceable human being, then succession stopped requiring proof. A ruler's heir didn't need to earn respect from nothing. He simply inherited a story that had already been told and retold long enough to feel like fact. Public ritual cemented all of it into something people experienced repeatedly rather than simply believed once. Processions, festivals, temple ceremonies, and monumental architecture turned an abstract claim into something a person could physically walk through, kneel inside of, and watch happen year after year with their own eyes. Physical grandeur functioned as constant, silent reinforcement, a way of making abstract authority feel as undeniable as stone. By the time some ancient rulers began presenting themselves not merely as favored by higher powers, but as something closer to divine, the psychological work was almost complete. Wearing symbols associated with divinity, appearing larger than everyone else in official art, standing physically above defeated rivals in carved monuments. These were not simply displays of ego. They were finely tuned instruments of persuasion, aimed less at rival elites and more at the psychology of an ordinary person trying to decide whether resistance was even conceivable. What's genuinely unsettling, looking back, is how little of this required conscious design. Nobody sat down and engineered human obedience from first principles. It emerged from a slow accumulation of ordinary pressures: dependence, fear, ritual, inherited belief, each one small, reasonable, and explainable on its own, stacking quietly until an entire population found itself lowering its eyes in front of a stranger without ever quite deciding to. And that, more than any crown or army, is the real inheritance kingship left behind. Long after divine bloodlines stopped convincing anyone, the underlying psychological trick never disappeared. The idea that authority can exist independently of the individual holding it, that an office deserves a kind of deference no single person could ever personally earn. Every time we accept that an institution's authority outlives the person who happens to occupy it, we are running a piece of very old software, first installed thousands of years ago, in the mind of someone who once looked at a stranger, and for reasons they may never have fully understood, decided not to meet their eyes.